Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about the new album from Chick Chick Chick, Let It Be Blue. Okay then, so I'm going a little off format today. Chick 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 is one of those bands that falls on the border of what could be considered electronic. While they implement electronic influences and mark certain albums of theirs as electronic, many would probably consider them to fall more within alternative rock, their sound typically being labeled as dance punk. A six-piece outfit with a rotating cast, currently comprised of lead singer Nick Offer, guitarist Mario Andreoni, keyboardist and trumpeter Dan Gorman, bassist Raphael Cohen, drummer Chris Egan, and backup vocalist Maya Pace. Sorry if I got pronunciations wrong on any of those. This band has been a mainstay on Warp Records since the early 2000s, regularly putting out albums, with this one marked as their 9th to date. And I'd been curious about them because, despite their presence on such a legendary label, it seems like no one ever talks about them. It's not because they're more of a rock-leaning group on a label famous for electronic music. Obviously, bands like Squid or Battles still get widely covered by reviewers I follow, even when the latter band's output appears to be not as well acclaimed as they once were. And it's not because Chick 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 don't have a dedicated fanbase of their own or haven't seen some acclaim in their own right. Their albums are pretty well received by publications like Pitchfork and AllMusic, and they do have their big fans. They're just not covered by any of the reviewers I follow or, ever brought up in the music discussion circles I've been a part of. They're just the weird black sheep of the Warp roster that just kinda sit there in plain view, awkwardly sharing space next to the Outakers and Square Pushers of the world, never to be addressed. I was paying attention for their last 3 album cycles and considered covering them each time, but got distracted by other things. And still, no one else even so much as brought them up. Only mention I can really remember them getting in my circles is when Oliver from Deep Cuts did his video on the history of Warp Records and mentioned offhand that he was not impressed when he saw them live opening for someone else. So I thought, what the hell, if nobody else is going to cover them, I'll just do it myself to satisfy my own curiosity. I'm a lot less willing to cover artists that fall outside of my electronic-only format if they are already popular and get covered by other people who are better equipped to talk about them than I am, but I'm willing to be more lax with those boundaries if I'm interested enough and/or said artists aren't seeing the level of attention I'd expect, like these guys are. Also, I consider LCD Sound System to fall within my format, been a huge fan of them for years, so I can probably make an exception for these guys as well. They're considered to be pretty closely related and even once had one member in common. Tyler Pope was a founding member, although he isn't a part of it now. I even remember when I was a little kid and finding these guys on iTunes thanks to some browsing feature they had at the time which showed all existing bands on the platform marked as electronic and seeing them show up first alphabetically, though at the time I heard 3 seconds of their music and was like, nope. I was probably 13 years old then, give me a break. But anyway, I finally sat down with their whole catalog to find out whether they deserved more attention or get overlooked for good reason, and here's my thoughts on their discography so far. Well, this is way out of my usual format, but I definitely do not dislike it. They've got all the right ingredients for really solid, rollicking, punky disco grooves, driving drum beats and bass lines, funky rhythm guitars, even a horn section, and that sense of groove they consistently have still makes this a fun listen. What they don't really have is, tunes or melodies. These tracks have the bare minimum of what one could call a tune that are really musically simplistic or occasionally quite dissonant, and Nick Offer sings like if Joe Strummer were incapable of carrying a tune. This is not a keeper for me, and I might have rejected it out of hand entirely if you'd given it to me anytime before 2017, but I don't think it's bad at all. I'm mildly intrigued for what I'm about to hear. This seems to be their most consistently well-received project, the one where they first got picked up by Warp. Certainly, there's a wider variety of ideas on display here, going into weirder and more experimental territory with slightly more present electronic influences, also with some anti-Bush and anti-Giuliani politics in the lyrics, and even some actual attempts at singing here and there. Still not in love with it, still falls a bit on the tuneless side, but it does markedly pick up from the track Hello Is This Thing On onwards. This is their most popular album on iTunes, and oh hey, this one has actual tunes! The more experimental edges of their last album are less present here, which makes it a less interesting listen, but the songs themselves being much better crafted does make it at least equally as engaging. Kind of like the surf rock flavors of some moments here too. Okay, so this is their first album that actually feels like it fits within my format specifically. And not just because the electronic textures are more present here, but it really feels like they went about it with an electronic ethos this time too, and basically just made a straight disco funk album. Their previous stuff was rock with dance grooves, but this one specifically feels like a dance album first and foremost, in which the backbeat and groove takes importance over all else, and each track seems to pick up where the last one left off, like a DJ set. I had a ton of fun with this. The first one I can actually see myself hanging on to. This is the first album of theirs that actually got marked as electronic on iTunes and not alternative. And sure enough, it is their brightest, friendliest, and poppiest release yet. I feel like I should be more excited about this new direction, but something's hitting weirdly more hollow about it. A lot of these tracks feel designed to soundtrack commercials, and it felt like it lacked the punchiness or edge of their previous stuff. It's cool, just eh. Okay, but this is kind of what I wanted the last album to be. This is their first album that's unambiguously electronic, combining their trademark disco punk sound with primarily synth instrumentals, house beats, and pitch-shifted vocals, landing them in similar territory to Basement Jaxx. I fuck with it. Like the last album, but it's 2017, so it's time to get political again. Dun dun dun. Instrumentally, it's just as playful and lively as always, with even more soulful guest singers, too. Lyrically, it's a lot more depressing, and carrying a similar kind of Gen X resignation as, like, LCD Soundsystem's American Dream. Willing to address modern political issues, like everything being controlled by the same 5 companies, and delivering a lot of shake off the world's problems by dancing kind of messages. Hence the title, but also knowing how little that might actually help, and even basically just kind of giving up at the very end out of feeling too old for this shit, as was the mood in 2017. It does feel so specific to the mood of that particular moment in time that I'm not really sure what to do with it from today's perspective, but I absolutely would have gotten into it if I'd covered it at the time of its release. And this one is just weird, like an all-over-the-place mishmash of various 90s house pastiches that vary heavily in tone, with a few other political moments on top of that. I want to say I liked it more than the last one. It is probably the album of theirs that most lands in my wheelhouse, but all the wild shakeups in sound make it difficult for me to be able to form a concrete opinion on it. I guess it's good. Which brings us to here. I'm starting to wonder if I've gone a little out of my depth here, especially with those last two, but I don't think either the band's fans or the band themselves take any of this stuff all that seriously at the end of the day. These guys do have a lot of solid dance music under their belts. Strange Weather was almost certainly my personal favorite out of all their stuff, but I did find myself generally liking their whole catalog to various degrees, even if it was just respect from a distance, as with their early stuff. They're definitely not one of my, new favorite bands or anything. I would totally get it if you found them insufferable, and they seem to want to be regarded as really obnoxious by those outside their fan base and stuff. Again, I can't imagine I would have given them the time of day if this were 2016 or any time earlier. But I don't think they're worth hating on either. These guys clearly just like having fun, and I don't see any harm in the stuff they've done up to this point. Now, when it comes to this album, I wasn't sure what to expect. I did hear, little promo bits of 2 pre-album singles through the Warp Records Twitter. First, I heard a bit of the track Here's What I Need to Know, and I thought that bit was really good, had, a nice plastic disco groove to it. Hearing that bit was the moment at which I decided I wanted to make this video in the first place. Although after that I heard the track Panama Canal, and I thought that was flat out terrible. An annoyingly repetitive chorus leading up to a wheedly and even more annoying drop with a weird on-the-nose video where people just carry around giant pairs of scissors. Though on the other hand, that chorus has just been unfixably lodged in my mind for weeks now. I keep finding myself whispering, cut through like a Panama Canal to myself. And it's weird. I had a feeling this album could be a bit of a mixed bag, and it's gotten little to no buzz at all so far, despite all the promo it's gotten. So who knows how this was going to turn out. And after listening to Let It Be Blue in full, I had no idea what the fuck I just listened to. It might be simultaneously their weirdest and most intentionally garish listen to date, while also the closest they've ever resembled mainstream pop, even more so than their Thriller album. Bright and polished electro-pop with flashy vocal arrangements with lots of stutter edits and intentionally cheesy background singers, elements of Latin music, trap, 90s house, and breakbeat, their usual pop rock sound. It's a mishmash of so many different sounds, and it was even more all over the place than Wallop was. So I thought, okay, clearly this is the kind of thing I'll need to listen to a few times to be able to pin down a more concrete opinion. And I have listened to it more and pinned down a more concrete opinion. Heck, my thoughts had pretty much formed by the end of listen, too, when I was like, okay, this album is bad. It's just bad. It's their worst album by a considerable margin. It seems to have coalesced all the worst aspects of this band together, while weirdly downplaying the aspects of their sound that actually made their previous material work. It's not irredeemable, there are still like scattered moments of quality throughout the whole thing, but they keep getting outweighed by all the moments that irritate me instrumentally or lyrically. The album starts out innocent enough, but something seems kinda off from the jump. It opens with a mediocre acoustic guitar ballad called Normal People that seems to be about being in denial about the state of the world or something, I don't know. It's a track that definitely thinks it's deep regardless of how deep it actually is, and for whatever reason it feels like the guitar and the singer are in two different studios. Nothing else on the album sounds remotely like that though. You get a bit more indicative look of what the album's all about with A Little Bit More, which is this weird house cut with all these pitched down vocals in the same style as Disclosure's Bang That or Get Close. Except with a whole bunch of screechy, maybe synth effects going throughout the entire thing. The lyrics are pretty brainless and can be easily ignored, although there's also a couple of lines about this being the hot new sound, which are kind of eye-roll inducing. It's kind of basic, it's kind of shallow, it's one of the best tracks on the album. The groove is decent, irritating moments are kept to a minimum, it's fine. And there's the lead single, Storm Around the World. This is technically another one of the best moments on the album, but again, something just still felt off to me about it. It gives me the same vibe that their Thriller album did, where everything's just got this plastic commercial sheen to it. The mix of acoustic guitars playing fairly generic chord progressions with fairly generic lyrics about being in love, and a rap verse from Maria Uzor from the band Sink Ya Teeth. There's no ideas here I found outright objectionable. I can see how people would still vibe to it, but it just comes off kind of hollow to me. I don't know. When I was looking through the album's lyrics on Genius, I also saw a comment from Nick Offer mentioning how the album was built mostly on computers but didn't always feel like it. They are trying to blur that line between what is fake and what is real. And while I can see how they were trying to do that, I don't think they actually succeeded. That most of this album was built on computers seems really obvious to me from how processed and manufactured the production on this entire project feels. But anyways, after a particularly annoying house rap track, almost entirely in Spanish with Un Puente, that track is really mind-numbing. Then we get the track that actually convinced me to check this band and this album out, Here's What I Need to Know. It is my favorite track here, but even this was kind of a disappointment too. Like, the drop at the end with those fantastic bass lines and thick disco grooves is still great, but I wasn't expecting that section, which was focused on in the Twitter promo, to only comprise the last minute or so of a 4-minute track. There's 3 entire minutes of airy buildup with all these ugly and garish synth organs running through half of that. And while the payoff at the end is worth it, I can't help but feel a little ripped off by how little of the track said payoff actually comprises. Meanwhile, you got Panama Canal, which, I'll admit I do actually like a fair bit more than I did when I first heard that preview. For better or worse, this is probably the catchiest track this band has ever made throughout their entire 20-plus year history, and that half-whispered chorus is going to continue to haunt me for years to come. Whether or not you consider that a good thing is up to you, though I do respect coming up with a hook that's this level of insidiously sticky, and I was surprised by how I found it less annoying the longer it lingered in my head. However, the drop on this track with all those pitched up voices is still absolutely terrible. That whole part that's going yeah, what the fuck are you doing? Anyway, this ends the good half of the album. This thing really starts to drop off after this point. There was a cover of R.E.M.'s Man on the Moon, which sounds way tackier, way uglier, and more smugly self-satisfied than the original, despite a good sample loop in the initial seconds of the track. I'm not gonna say I'm like a huge R.E.M. fan myself. They're more of a band that my parents like than one I ever got into. And I will not deny that Chick 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 made this track feel like something they would have come up with on their own. But to turn it into this just feels wrong, borderline disrespectful. From there we got the title track, which has all these blaring and overbearing squelchy synth bass and Nick Offer switching off between trying on a goofy Prince impression and sounding like James Murphy's deeper voiced moments, delivering lyrics about looking back on some disaster that's just happened and thinking, oh well, I guess nothing could be done, I'll just let it be blue. I can't tell whether this is meant to be about a relationship or trying to be a political statement. I kinda suspect it's the former, but if it's the latter, oh my fucking god, shut up. I hate that Gen X attitude of, oh, we can't fix the world, so don't even bother trying. And they've shown that attitude before. That's literally where the title of Shake the Shutter came from. So I wouldn't put it past them to make that kind of statement here as well. Again, from the less broad tone of the rest of the album, I think it's more likely just about moving on from a relationship, which is much less irritating, but still not a fan of this track, even ignoring the less charitable interpretations. The next track, It's Gray, It's Gray, It's Gray, has a much better message of remaining optimistic even in darker times, but sounds astronomically worse, with all these fuzzy blocks of noisy guitars and fast-paced drums completely swallowing up the vocals. I guess this is their attempt at touching back to their punk roots, but man, is the sound of this one just a giant overblown headache? Crazy Talk is one of the less offensive sounding tracks. The singing is kind of annoying and the harmonies are kind of sour, but the instrumental of the simple breakbeat and little synth riff is fine. And the lyrics, as far as I can tell, are about how great ironic detachment is. You can hide behind your irony shields and pass your true feelings off as just crazy talk, but still highlight some deeper truth at the bottom in the process. And if you say so. I'm just reminded of that time where J. Cole, fired off shots at Iggy Azalea and tried to walk it back with oh, don't worry, I'm just playing, but all jokes contain true shit. But then the album finally culminates in This Is Pop 2. One of the better sounding tracks, with some faster beats and acoustic guitars. But it is also the most infuriating track in the bunch and single-handedly ruined the entire album. The lyrics are all about pop music itself and how it's inherently stupider and more shallow than other music, but also about how pop music is great directly because of that. They give you the shallow rush of dopamine without you having to think about anything, and it's better off that it's stupider. What the fuck? Pop music is a genre that it can be deep on its own. It's not inherently worse or stupider than other genres, it's just another genre. Hearing this track for the first time was what convinced me this album just flat out sucked. It felt like a meta statement on what they were doing with the entire project as a whole. See, they're going pop ironically. They're making a statement about the garish shallowness of modern pop by making pop music that highlights how shallow it is. That's why this album is produced the way it is, that's why this album's lyrics are the way they are. It explains every single musical decision they made on this thing, and I fucking hate it. This track all on its own cleared up how previously baffled I was by their creative decisions, but also made any of my respect for it go out the fucking window. What sucks is that their observations about the shallowness of pop are correct when it comes to this stuff on this particular album, and the parts of it I actually liked. Tracks like Here's What I Need to Know can still give me that dopamine rush, and there's so many parts of tracks all over that I think do work in that particular way, but knowing that they were intentionally trying to make guilty pleasure music and highlighted the cynical attitude behind all of it, just ruined it. Doing something ironically does not make you better than doing something unironically. It just makes you look like a smug jackass. And it may be true that this smug attitude is a running theme through Chick Chick Chick's entire career, but I never minded it on their other albums because it felt like they were making music they sincerely enjoyed making and were being annoying punks to stick it to those in power. Even when they were burnt out and on the verge of giving up on their last two albums, it felt like their heart was still in the right place. This album is just self-defeating, and the point they tried to make with it is a dead horse that's already been beaten down by Gen Xers for years on end. Like, oh, you think you're so clever by pointing out the shallowness of pop music. No one has ever done that before. I don't know what else to say. I really went into this wanting to like it, but came out feeling annoyed that I gave it as much of a chance as I did. Check out their other stuff if you're curious, but I would stay away from this particular one. I'm overall feeling a 3.7 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.